Greetings and welcome to our webinar, Mining, the State, the Society, Mexico and South Africa. My name is Susana Caputi. I will be your program director today. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I am Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue associated with the University of South Africa. In this webinar, we hope that you get an understanding of the concept, an understanding of the current situation of the mining sector in Mexico and in South Africa, from the extensive research conducted by our experts in this sector. Just a short introduction of the main speakers. Our main speakers from Mexico are Professor Humberto González and Professor Claudio Garibay Orozco. And from South Africa, Professor Dion Heldenhuis and Professor Johan Tempelhof and Mrs. Elise Tempelhof. The value of this webinar is the comparative study between Mexico and South Africa, a binational project that shows the importance of the mining sector in both countries. Our speakers and moderator. Our moderator is going to be Dr. Philani Umthembu, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue associated with UNISA. Our first speaker, Her Excellency Sara Valdez Bolaño, Ambassador of Mexico to South Africa. She will give introductory remarks to the series of webinars planned for 2024. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susana. Gracias.
Thank you, Susana. Welcome to this first virtual roundtable of 2024, coordinated jointly with UNISA's Institute for Global Dialogue. A few months ago, we met with the aim of exploring collaboration schemes that would involve different social, economic, and political aspects of Mexico and South Africa, two geographically distant countries, emerging powers of the Global South with international presence, each experiencing far-reaching transitions with specificities, yet with striking similarities between them. We agree that the broad and in-depth academic work for the publication Global South Powers in Transition, a comparative analysis of Mexico and South Africa, the first comparative study of the two countries published in 2019 in the Regional Integration and Social Cohesion series from Peter Lang. This work represents a significant basis for understanding some of the dynamics of both countries. More importantly, it brings together the scholars who participated in this work in an exercise of reflection and updating on important and particular issues for both countries, with the aim of also motivating new generations of social science researchers to participate in the development of what editors of the volume define as collaborative transnational methodology. We agreed to schedule a series of 4 roundtables throughout 2024. The first one, following the recent Mining Indaba 2024 in South Africa, we present this conversation on the mining sector, which is so important to the economies of both countries. In May, we plan to discuss sociocultural diversity, the struggle for nationhood and citizenship in the framework of the World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. We will present a third roundtable under the title Comparative Analysis of Political Dynamics in Mexico and South Africa. That will be in August. And finally, in October, on the 31st anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries, we will coordinate a roundtable on international relations and foreign policy of Mexico and South Africa. I thank Dr. Pilani Mtembu, Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue, and his team for joining us in this year of reflection on Mexico and South Africa. I'm also grateful for the willingness and work of the co-editors of the book, Dr. Humberto González and Professor Emeritus Dion Heldenhuis, as well as the authors of the chapter on mining, Dr. Claudio Garibay, Dr. Elise Tempelhoff, and Professor Johan Tempelhoff. I would also like to acknowledge the tireless enthusiasm for making this project a reality of Susana Caputi, Senior Researcher Associate at the IGT, and Nayeli Ceseña, Cultural Affairs and International Development Cooperation Officer at the Embassy. I'm confident that the conversations and reflections emanating from these and the other roundtables will contribute to an ongoing dialogue between academic institutions and think tanks in Mexico and South Africa, as well as to greater understanding between our countries. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, embajadora. Our next speaker is Dr. Pilani Mtembu. He will give an introduction update on the mining sector in South Africa, current overview of the labor conflicts that have recently worried the industry, which has shown a component of mining unions competing for the same labor force. The floor is yours, Dr. Pilani Mtembu.
Thank you very much, Susanna. I think there was a bit of a glitch with the translation. I hope that the translation is audible to some of our guests. So let's just flag that. But colleagues, thank you very much. I think also to the team, yourself, Susanna, but also with your counterparts at the Embassy of Mexico. But also thank you to the co-authors and editors that have joined us today. Essentially, today's discussion, colleagues, stems from a publication that we've been discussing at various times, I think throughout the last few years, also as the Institute for Global Dialogue, titled Global South Powers in Transition, a comparative analysis of Mexico and South Africa. Now, colleagues, I think it's an important publication because it touches on a whole range of comparative studies in the various sectors within Mexico and within South Africa. But it places, I think, those particular case studies within a broader regional and global framework, and essentially looks at these global South powers that are in transition. Now, essentially, this series of dialogues will take place over a minimum of 4 dialogues that are planned throughout this year, touching on various dimensions in a comparative manner between South Africa and Mexico. We hope that by doing this, we do not only focus necessarily on our respective countries, but that we also highlight the dynamics of our respective regions. Both Mexico and South Africa play important roles within their respective regions, but also in various global institutions. And today's discussion frames it within the mining and also the state and society. And what I want to do, because essentially the speakers who have done the thorough research and will be updating some of it, putting it in a contemporary framework, what I will just do is highlight just a few areas sort of global trends and some of the recent events that have shaped mining both in South Africa, Mexico, but also globally. And then allow our speakers to dive into depth in their various case studies, but then locating them within a contemporary landscape. Colleagues, there's been a few trends of late. We are still in the month of February, where we had the Mining Indaba themed Embracing the Power of Positive Disruption, a bold new future for African mining. And throughout this Mining Indaba, there were a few themes that emerged. Some of these themes that emerged included the importance of Africa's resources in fueling the future of the world. If we think especially in new technologies, Africa is playing and will continue to play an important role when it comes to fueling those new technologies. Some of the partnerships that were also discussed during the Mining Indaba included, for instance, on the African continent, a partnership between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia to facilitate the development of lithium batteries. This partnership is aimed at essentially enabling the manufacturing of electric car batteries in what is seen as a key milestone towards poverty alleviation for both countries. If we think about the Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance, essentially the heart of the continent, it has an estimated $24 trillion in untapped deposits of cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, and other minerals. And certainly the DRC occupies a prominent role in the mining industry in Africa. The Mining Indaba saw high representation again, with 94 government officials from 71 countries present. And what is then important is that taking place in South Africa, there was a lot of reflection around the state of the mining industry in South Africa. Of course, South Africa was once the main, or at least mining in South Africa, could be argued was one of the main driving forces behind the development of this economy. However, within that, there were always a lot of questions around labor rights, around the role of major corporations, around the conditions also of workers within the mining sector. And these are questions that the democratic state has had to tackle through areas such as the safety, enhancing the safety of mining, continuing to attract investment, but also adapting to an economy that is now largely centered on the services sector. So mining no longer occupies, it's still important, but it no longer occupies the type of role that it historically occupied in South Africa. And within the South African context, there's also been a number of challenges between, and we know historically the trade unions have played a critical role in this industry. And so we've seen in recent months in South Africa tensions once again flaring up between the National Union of Mine Workers and the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU. And what this has posed, especially after the Mining Indaba, which took place now in February, one of the things that sort of critics have been posing for South Africa is what is the state of the future of mining within the country. But also, I think one of the things that have been important in terms of some of the key trends that we have seen as challenges in South Africa have also been what some are calling disinvestment, a potential disinvestment in the mining sector in South Africa. We've seen just in recent days and in recent weeks and months, even following the Mining Indaba, we've seen, for instance, 2 weeks ago that Anglo Plats announced 3,600 retrenchments. We've also seen that last week, Kumba Iron announced 700 job cuts. This week, we've also had an announcement from Sibanye of 1,000 retrenchments. And of course, this poses the question of disinvestment, but it also poses the question of what are some of the challenges and the opportunities in the mining sector, not only in South Africa, but also on the African continent, knowing very well that when we're talking about new technologies, when we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about electric vehicles and other technologies that will become very critical in driving the future of global cooperation, that mining as a sector will continue to play a key role. And the question for South Africa and for Africa is whether it can utilize its position to actually create regional value chains, to create more jobs at the source, but also to ensure that those jobs are quality jobs moving forward, and obviously to manage the relations between the various labor unions. And so, colleagues, without going into further depth, let me just say that I look forward to today's discussion, which will unpack some of the very interesting studies that have been conducted by our authors based in South Africa and also based in Mexico, in an effort to also bridge the gaps between the two countries and the two continents, and to enhance South-South cooperation. And so each of the speakers will have about 15 minutes, and then we will go into a question and answer, and also just to a discussion. And I would welcome everyone to utilize their vantage points where they are based geographically, but also in terms of their own research to add to today's discussion. And with that, I wish to then welcome Professor Dion Geldenhuys, who is a co-editor, who will essentially give a short overview of the origin and content of the Global South Powers in Transition publication, and then walk us through some of the transnational collaborative methodology and difficulties encountered in conducting such a comparative analysis. And with that, Professor Geldenhuys, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pulani. May I just make sure, Susanna, that simultaneous translation is also being done? Should I speak at a fairly slow tempo? Is that required?
Yes, you don't need to go too slow as long as your sentences are complete. Yes, our translation capabilities are working at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pulani, for the introduction. In the commercial world, there's an expression that says that a product still has feet, by which is meant that the particular product still enjoys consumer demand. The product has, in other words, not gone out of fashion, and consumers have not lost their taste for that product. What today's webinar suggests to me is that our book, Global South Powers and Transition, still has feet, at least in academia and in policymaking circles. And for that achievement, thanks are due to Susanna Caputi, to the IGD, and the Mexican Embassy in South Africa. Let me now turn to the origins of the research project that gave birth to this book. It was born out of a mixture of ignorance and curiosity. And that dates back to when Umberto and I met. I think Umberto, the first time was in 2010 in Colombia. We, I think, looking back, found an immediate rapport, Umberto and I, and with that went a curiosity about each other's country or society, coupled with a realization that we knew very little about the other person's country, hence the ignorance. So what did we do about this realization that we have a shared interest in each other's country, but that we are, in a sense, paralyzed by overwhelming ignorance? We decided to turn this quest for knowledge and understanding about our respective countries into an academic research project. But we sensed at the outset, I think it's fair to say, Umberto, that we couldn't do it on our own. This wasn't a two-person job. Our ambitions for the project extended far beyond our capabilities. So what did we then do? We developed a collaborative transnational methodology. That concept, I must immediately acknowledge, comes from Umberto, and he still is far better equipped than I am to explain the deeper meaning of this collaborative transnational methodology. We opted for, as the title of the book suggests, a comparative study of Mexico and South Africa. In other words, we wanted to identify similarities and differences between our two societies. We, from the start, identified two important contextual factors, if you like, two markers for our intended study. And those are that South Africa and Mexico are both global South powers. In other words, they are countries that hail from, or at least identify with, the global South or the former developing world. That's the one important marker. And we also refer to them as powers. In other words, these are countries of consequence in their respective regions and beyond. You will also notice that the term transition is used in the title of the book. By that, we simply mean these are countries undergoing multifaceted processes of change in various areas. We, in fact, selected 10 issue areas that would highlight important aspects in the respective societies and that we believed call for close examination. One of those issue areas is on the agenda this afternoon, and that, of course, is the mining sectors in South Africa and Mexico. Some of the other, among the 10 issue areas, are socio-cultural diversity, demographic dynamics, political situations, labor dynamics, social and territorial inequalities, food vulnerability, violent crime, and the international roles or the foreign policies of Mexico and South Africa, respectively. Another important element of the way we approach the study is that we decided that in each of these 10 issue areas, there would be separate Mexican and South African case studies. And these case studies would be conducted by experts from the two countries. In all, 26 authors contributed to the volume, and they were drawn from different disciplines, nearly all of them from the social sciences. Implied in what I'm saying is that by then, Humberto and I had appointed ourselves as the co-editors. The experts in the two countries, these 26 individuals, were identified by me in the South African case and Humberto in the case of the Mexican experts. They were approached by us, and I'm very happy to say that from the outset we were very fortunate in that I think 90% plus of those experts that we approach said yes from the word go. The research project was launched with 2 workshops. The first workshop was held in Guadalajara several years ago, and at that workshop, the contributors in each of the 10 issue areas presented an outline of the case study they would be conducting. Now, apart from 2 separate case studies on each topic, there would also be, we decided, a common introduction to that particular chapter. The introduction will be devised by the author contributing to the particular case study, and they would also write a joint conclusion to their case study. So come the Guadalajara workshop, concepts of a joint introduction, joint conclusion, and separate case studies was discussed, and we subjected each and every submission or concept to a rigorous discussion in which all 20 plus participants could participate. So it was a form of actually quite vigorous, but thinking back, I think very beneficial peer reviews that we conducted at that first workshop. The second workshop was held in Johannesburg about 10 months later, when draft chapters were presented by the authors on the 10 issue areas, and again subjected to comments from all the contributors to the project. After that second workshop, we gave all the contributing authors 8 months in which to revise their chapters or case studies and submit them to the 2 co-authors. The next step was 2 meetings that Humberto and I held in Guadalajara, where we closely read all the contributions and formulated final recommendations for the authors. And they were given a particular time frame in which to resubmit their revised chapters. We also had the benefit of extensive reports from 2 peer reviewers, and we submitted the suggestions of the peer reviewers to the authors. And the final result, of course, is then this book, Global South Powers in Transition, a comparative analysis of South Africa and Mexico. The English edition was published in 2019, and the Spanish edition thereafter. Ilani, you asked me to say a word about the challenges that we faced in conducting the research and preparing for the book. I mentioned some of them. First of all, we had to get all the contributors to the workshops in Guadalajara and later in Johannesburg. Of course, that took a bit of an effort. There was also, as you can imagine, a financial obligation that we had to meet to get people there, pay for the transport, pay for the accommodation. We had to use simultaneous translation into English and Spanish at both our workshops. Again, that was an expense, but I'm happy to say we managed to solicit fundings, and we had expert translators at our disposal. Then there was extensive translation work that had to be done of each of the chapters, from Spanish into English, from English into chapters. Umberto had the lion's share of responsibility in overseeing or supervising the Spanish translation after we had completed the English version of the book. In conclusion, Pulani, ladies and gentlemen, I began by observing that our comparative study of Mexico and South Africa still has feet. I conclude on a similar note by reminding you, if reminding is required, of the inspiring slogan that is associated with the legendary Johnny Walker. And that slogan, of course, is "Keep Walking." You might think it refers to keep up something else, being Johnny Walker. Nonetheless, my hope is that keep walking will be the future of this research initiative. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I think definitely highlighting the importance of the project, but also the challenges of actually such a project across continents and across countries. And with that, I think let me invite one of the other co-editors before we dive into the case study of Mexico and South Africa, Professor Humberto Gonzalez, who's a co-editor, and we'll just touch on the completion also of the book and the project in terms of the Spanish version, and also the importance that the comparative project between Mexico and South Africa has in enriching the academic discussion and the ties of collaboration between the academics, the students, and also the various stakeholders in the two nations. And with that, Professor Gonzalez, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Quiero agradecer a
I would
la
like to thank
Embajada de México
the Mexican Embassy
y al
and
Instituto para Estudios Globales
IGT
y en particular también al trabajo
particularly
que ha
the
realizado
work
Susana
that Susana
para
has
poder
done
tener esta
to be able to
mesa redonda.
host this roundtable.
Había preparado
I had
un texto
prepared
que iba
a
a leer,
text
pero
that I was
voy
going to
a
read,
improvisar y a
but I'm
seguir
going to
algunos
improvise
puntos
and
de los
follow
que
some of
había
the
escrito.
points that I had written.
La idea es, creo que
The idea is
Dion ha hecho una buena
Dion
síntesis del proceso que
summarized the
implicó
process
una iniciativa que
involved
surgió
in this
en
initiative
varias
that
reuniones
arose from
que
different
organizó
meetings
el
and
Consorcio
reunions
de
that
Investigación
the
sobre
Consorcio de
Integración
Investigación
Regional y Cohesión
sobre
Social,
Integración
que hoy
Regional y
día
Cohesión
tiene su
Social
sede en
organized,
la Universidad de
and it has its
Johannesburgo.
headquarters in Johannesburg.
Y bueno, en estas reuniones
And well, during these meetings,
hubimos un politólogo sudafricano
a
y un
politologist,
antropólogo mexicano
an
que a
Mexican
la postre
anthropologist.
fuimos muy buenos y somos muy buenos amigos
We are
y
very good friends.
yo diría
And I would
extraordinarios
say
colaboradores. Descubrimos
extraordinary
similitudes que
collaborators.
nos
We
sorprendieron
identified
entre
similarities
sus
that
respectivas
surprised
naciones.
us between
Y
our
esto pues
nations.
nos llevó
And
a
this
plantear un
took
proyecto
us
para
to think about a
estudiarlas de manera
project to study
sistemática
them in a
en el
systematic
marco
way
del proceso de
in the framework of the
globalización
process of
y
globalization
desde las
and
perspectivas o desde
from the
la perspectiva
perspective
de los países del sur.
of these
El estudio
global south
concretamente
countries.
se
This
propuso
study
comprender
was
cómo
proposed,
México
or it
y
had the
Sudáfrica
intention to
enfrentaban
identify
cambios
how Mexico and South
ambientales,
Africa were
económicos,
facing
políticos
environmental
y
challenges, political and
socioculturales debido a
social
una,
challenges
a
due
una mayor
to
articulación e
the
interdependencia
articulation
global.
and in global
Los dos
interdependency.
como países tienen, como ya
These
se ha
two countries,
mencionado, similitudes,
as it
pero
was mentioned, they
también
have
tienen
two similarities,
diferencias.
but they also have
Y en
differences.
la comparación de ambas
And
también encontramos que
to compare both, we
tienen
also
grandes retos
saw that they
sociales,
have
como
great
son
challenges, social
altas tasas de
challenges,
pobreza y desigualdad
poverty
social,
and inequality,
problemas
social
muy
inequality,
serios que
issues
sobre degradación ambiental
with
que ha implicado
environmental
un
degradation
desarrollo
that has
acelerado
led to
que
the accelerated
implica o que está relacionado con la mayor
related to
articulación al
the
mercado mundial
articulation
y
of a global
también
market,
enfrentan problemas
and
de
it also
seguridad y de
they also
violencia que
face problems with
polarizan a
violence,
nuestras
insecurity that
poblaciones
polarize
y
our
afectan
societies
la
and affect
convivencia social. El proyecto comparativo
social.
reunió a 26 investigadores de ambos
This project
países,
reunited 26
quienes
researchers from
trabajamos
both countries that
virtual y
worked
presencialmente, como ya lo
virtually and
señaló
face to face,
a
as it was
Dion,
pointed out by
durante 3
Dion,
años.
during
Este
3 years.
arduo y prolongado trabajo
This
resultó
prolongated work
atractivo porque el
resulted
proyecto
attractive
comparativo se
because the
propuso
comparative project was
desafiar las
proposed,
teorías de
it proposed
globalización que
to
homogeneizan a las
challenge the
sociedades del
theories
sur
that
y las
homogenize
subordinan
South
a las
societies, and they
sociedades
are
del norte
subordinated to the societies
desarrollado.
of the global north.
Además,
That is
buscó
developed
traspasar
global
las
north. It
fronteras
also
disciplinarias
wanted
de las
to
ciencias
overcome
ambientales, sociales
disciplines in
y humanas
environmental
y planteó
human and
ampliar
social
y
sciences,
enriquecer
and
el
it
intercambio
aimed to
económico
promote
y científico
exchange,
entre
scientific
investigadores
and
de dos
economic exchange between
continentes
researchers
en
of
un
these two
trabajo que
continents
no se
in
había
a work
realizado.
without precedent.
Este proyecto
This project
representó un gran desafío,
represented
como lo
a
han
great challenge,
señalado
as it was
la
pointed out,
embajadora y también
the
Dion, mi
ambassador
colega,
and Dion,
ya que no
my colleague,
existían antecedentes de estudios comparativos entre
there
los
was no
dos
background between
países
these two
y
comparative
los
studies
investigadores
between these two countries, and
participantes
the researchers that
teníamos escaso
participated.
conocimiento y muchos
We didn't have a
prejuicios
lot of
sobre el
knowledge and
país
lots of
de
prejudices
sus contrapartes
from each other
nacionales que
country
íbamos a comparar.
that we
Por
were
ello
going to
fue
compare.
necesario
And this is why it was
desarrollar una
necessary to
estrategia
develop a
metodológica en el
strategy, a
camino
methodological
que ya
strategy
se ha
along the
señalado.
path.
En
As it
lugar
was
de recurrir a armonizar
highlighted,
las
instead
teorías
of
generales sobre
thinking
globalización,
about
nos
general
propusimos
theories,
desarrollar
we
una
proposed to develop
metodología
a
colaborativa
methodology,
transnacional
collaborative
basada en
methodology,
una epistemología
transnational based on an
transdisciplinaria
epistemology
y en un
transdisciplinary
diálogo
epistemology and a
intercultural.
dialogue
Esta
and a cross-cultural dialogue.
metodología nos
This
permitió
methodology
contextualizar
allowed
los
us to
indicadores
contextualize
y
the
narrativas en
indicators and
términos
narratives
históricos y
in terms of
territoriales,
historical
así
and
como
territorial
analizarlas de
at the
manera
context and to analyze
relacional.
them in a
Además,
relational way.
los temas
Also,
seleccionados nos permitieron
the topics
caracterizar el proceso de
selected allowed
transición
us
global
to
desde una
think about the
perspectiva
global transition from an
integral.
integral perspective.
Dion ya comentó
Dion talked
los
about
diferentes tópicos que tomamos
the
y que en
different
total fueron 10.
subjects.
Concretamente,
in
el
total,
tema de la minería no lo habíamos
the mining
considerado
topic,
inicialmente. Sin
didn't
embargo,
consider it
después de la
initially.
primera
However,
reunión que tuvimos
after
en
the first meeting
Guadalajara,
that we had in
decidimos
Guadalajara,
que era
we
un
decided
tema
that it was
imprescindible e
an
importante
important
para
issue
entender
to
las
address,
dinámicas
to
de
understand
cambio
the
de
dynamics
las dos
of change
naciones.
of these two
En la
nations.
siguiente reunión que tuvimos
And in
en
the following meeting
Johannesburgo,
that we had in
este
Johannesburg,
tema se
this
presentó
topic
y fue
arose and
trabajado
it was
por los dos o los
developed
tres presentadores
by the
de
three
esta mesa redonda.
co-authors of this
La
roundtable.
experiencia de
The
estudios
experience
comparativos que
of
esperamos
comparative
atraiga
studies
a más
that
adeptos
we
es
hope
una
will bring
invitación a
more
reflexionar
researchers is
sobre
an
los
invitation to
procesos de
reflect on the
transición
processes
de los países del sur, los cuales deben analizarse considerando
which
sus procesos
need to be
históricos
analyzed,
y
understanding the
territoriales
historical processes and
particulares,
territorial
así como
processes
la diversidad
within
cultural,
their own context,
étnica
the
y
same with the
lingüística que los
ethnic and
caracteriza.
linguistic
Creemos, y
elements
esta
that
es una
characterizes
invitación que hacemos
them. This is an
a
invitation
al Dion como coeditor y un
to
servidor,
Dion
es
as co-editor and
creemos
myself
firmemente
is
que la
to
investigación
we firmly
comparativa
believe that
entre
the
países del
comparative
sur
research
global
between
brinda
global south
valiosas
countries,
oportunidades
it
tanto
gives
heurísticas como
valuable
explicativas
opportunities
para una
heuristic and
comprensión más
to explain
profunda de los
and to
procesos de
comprehend
transición e
the
integración
transitional
global.
processes
Además,
of the
nos
global
permite
transitional
trazar
processes. It
rutas
also allows
hacia
us
un
to trace
desarrollo
paths
sostenible,
to sustainable
equitativo
development,
y justo.
equitable
Este
and
empeño
fair.
requiere ser
This
necesariamente colaborativo,
requires
inclusivo
collaboration.
y basado en un
It has
diálogo
to
de
be
saberes que
inclusive and to
reconozca
have
y
a
valore
dialogue of
el aporte
knowledges
de
that
nuestros pueblos
understand
originarios y de todos
what
los
our
sectores socioculturales.
native
Muchas gracias.
our native populations bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Gonzalez
Muchas gracias, profesor.
and Professor Hildenis. I think, you've essentially highlighted also not just the challenges, but also that some of those challenges should not necessarily be barriers for cooperation. Because I would like to believe such a study would certainly still have ability to even be replicated in a contemporary landscape, and even to even to go towards other countries within the global south. So I think it just highlights, I think, the opportunities also of research collaboration within the global south, especially in a time where what the editors mentioned, it was an intentional idea to mention it as global south powers, so that these are already countries that are playing consequential roles in their regions. And so with that, colleagues, I think let me invite the author of the Mexican case study, Dr. Claudio Garibay Orozco, who is a co-author of the chapter and will dive into the Mexican case study and some of the key conclusions that emerged in that case study. Professor, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. In South Africa, good morning in Mexico. We are here now to talk a little bit. I'm going now to share my screen.
Pues como les decía, buenas tardes.
As I was saying, good afternoon in South Africa, good morning in Mexico. I'm very happy for this invitation to be part of this meeting. in order to talk about the book, Powers in the Global South, that was published 7 years ago. I am grateful to our colleagues for inviting me to this group and for this new presentation that I'm going to do now. I wanted to say that when I received the invitation to this meeting, I realized that chapter 8 was going to be the first one that we were going to talk about, which I thought it was a little bit strange, or I felt it that way, and I started to think, why was that? Why were we going to start by chapter 8? And when I was thinking about it, I thought that it was not fortuitous, of course, because the 10 chapters were excellent. And I thought that there definitely was a reason. And the reason I thought, instead of asking Humberto, I was just doing some conjectures myself. And I thought that we were starting by chapter 8 was that Mexico and South Africa share one similar problem. And that problem is that we are both facing an organized power, a very large global power, that is the mining industry, the global mining industry. And I thought that was the reason. And now Dion just confirmed it to me of why mining was the first. And in fact, it is a very powerful global industry that is in Mexico, that is in South Africa, and it's everywhere, really. So, having that in mind, I want to do this reflection about Mexico, and I want to talk about how mining works in the world. So the first thing I would like to say is that mining, it currently is corporative mining, like very powerful and very well organized. It is an industry that has a large impact and lots of political influence, as Pirani have already told you. What I can see here is that the mining corporations are a global power, a very large global power that is everywhere. And that the way it works, it's a very particular way. This kind of mining has nothing to do with the traditional mining or the old mining. Even the kind of mining where population goes somewhere to try to extract a gold or some minerals, that kind of artisanal mining that persists just in very few places, maybe South Africa, for example, in very little places. But this new mining is completely different. First of all, they come into the countries because they are all in general, they are all international corporations. A few national corporations, but they are already work with the international corporations, so they get into the countries protected. So they arrive somewhere in the national territories, and they start to build up these settlements or these constructions, this infrastructure.
hacen una especie de ciudad.
And they kind of start building like a little city in the place where they come, and there's lots of workers there, but many of the workers are not from that particular place. They are coming from other places, and they enter that enclave or that settlement, and they stay there for days, for weeks, depending on the project, and they live there, and then they go back to their homes, maybe every weekend or every now and then. On the other hand, these are places that, through their infrastructure, they build a sophisticated infrastructure, and they have the power of the industrial mining. So they have machinery and like perforation kind of machinery, and to bring out the materials or the minerals through the system of perforation and exploration to gain the materials, the minerals that will be exported to the international system, depending on what is the material or the mineral that they are working with. If it is gold, immediately it will be a product that is very important as value reserve for national banks, for luxury in general, in places, and for persons that are well placed in society through the privilege of the system. And other materials go to the industry from these sites to the centers of reception, of the industrial reception, and from there they are exported. In this model, there is so this is a model that is similar to the oil industry, especially to the oil companies that extract from the sea, and they are completely outside, or they don't take into account at all the local population, the population who lives in the places where they extract. These kind of sites are developed in order to they are developed as a bunker, enclosed, so that the people from outside cannot come into the place, and they will be segregated outside. So it has nothing to do with the pre-industrial mining that, of course, was also exploitative, but it didn't have that logic. So these kind of mines, they came into conflict immediately with the local territories, because they are big consumers, very large consumers of water and of electricity, of power, and this is so. In order to keep this going, they need to bring some security systems and some mechanisms to protect their commodities or their products that are destined for the international market. So this kind of mines, this kind of exploitation are also a property of large corporations. So the owners are not local producers, or they are not even national businessmen or anything like that. So in this image they have,
so
now
we see an important miner that was working in Mexico. Well, he was exploiting mines in Mexico, and he owns this Peñasquito mine, the one you see here in the image. And the distribution of wealth of these mines in this case, and it's the same in most of them, it's striking. we can see the total in this slide of the sales of the 100%, $84.0 million. Production costs are very low because they are very efficient, and the profits, they are very high, 82%. So the salaries, the wages, is only 1%, and the payment for communities for buying their lands or to have it's only 0.18%. This type of mining works worldwide. So this is a technological, it's a type of mines that it's similar to all of them across the world. So mining in Mexico, this model grew during the neoliberal time when there was an opening to the global market with an influx of trade from national states to the global market. With the privatization of companies, there was a way of sharing in concessions this subsoil in Mexico. In this map, you can see different colors with this light blue. They create this logic of areas that are used as mines when there is a space for mines. These concessions, it's an important market for those who want to create also for the subsoil rights. Is they own it for 50 years. They own the rights of the subsoil for 50 years. And they own the property. They own these private properties. So if a company has a mine and a concession, they will have preference for this subsoil and displace the population. There are advantages because those who give these lands, they don't have limits. So those who get the land, they can be a few of them, a handful of them, and they can control a lot of the spaces within this territory. There are other advantages of these concession mechanisms of mines. This type of organizations, these companies, these corporates, is very well organized, in which I call a global mining cluster, which is a very sophisticated organization of relationships between these corporations, between the owners of these companies, with the international network of banks and other businesses, powerful businesses that have organized in a very intelligent manner. They were not organized, but in 1999, after the political disaster in the Rio summit or meeting, 17 corporations they decided to organize in something that was called Global Mining Initiative, founded in Davos, in Switzerland, with the aim to have a clean face to the public, with a better, to be able to have a better insertion in the public sphere and the social sphere. So they became socially responsible corporations. They build strategies. They build studies to try to make diagnostics of mining, sustainable mining, and they concluded with several sort of rules in this book that I'm showing. These are all the benefits and all the intelligent practices to promote links with committees, groups, communities of local populations. They propose to respect the communities with which they make sure that they are there and that they control them. They also favor gender equality and certain spaces, but in the practice, it is not like that. They are worried for their workers' well-being, and then they want environmental benefits, and they are very good. So this type of organization that is also very powerful, it's everywhere in the world. This Council of Mining and Metals, it included in 2001 half of the global corporates. And basically you can see here the most important ones: Australians, in South Africa, the group of mines in South Africa, in Philippines, Zambia, Chile, all this list where we can see all these powers very well organized. There are 21 corporations that brought this initiative. 35 associations were created, connected in different regions, and they used to control 1,200 mines, but this was like maybe 10 years ago, in 70 countries. So in this map, you can see where they are located, and one of them was very important. But they changed names. They are very intelligent. They changed names. So these corporations, they develop very well organized speeches. This council has different committees in different regions from which they show the sustainable mining as they call it. So this is how they work to go to the different countries and in the local spaces. I have developed for this topic that in their strategic intelligence they develop in local spaces what I call coercion horizon from a Mexican author, an anthropologist, such as me, to develop this concept in which the coercion horizon is a way of dominating local people. They are grounded in threatening, so they take a lot and they give a little bit, trying to avoid conflicts and problems with the population where they are located. These coercion horizons, they operate with fear and threats, and they are literally everywhere in the world. In Mexico, for example, we unfortunately had these terrible events due with the neoliberal arrival with President Salinas in the late 80s until now. So these coercion horizons in Mexico, they grew up because of organized crime that is still organized to defend the mines. If I go to the mines or to a mine, there are mines where I cannot go, people cannot go in Mexico. So it's an important shift after the new government with López Obrador, but it's still very weak. So the capacity of the Mexican state to revert this problem, it's still incipient. In several mining areas, these are spaces that are controlled by this organized crime, where no one can come in, and the corporates, they have never had any issue coming in and out. I am developing a project, and there is a work in progress, but basically nothing happens to the mines. There are conflicts among groups, criminal groups, because they are fighting for the territory to make businesses with the mines. Because they are at a macro level, mines are at a macro level, and they have their own mechanisms. They eventually they need protection.
But ethnographically, it is evident. It is clear. In the field work, when you go, there is a power relation. So from these companies that are there. In the mining council in the world. So that's the way these mine sites or these companies build this kind of horizons, the coercion horizons, or horizons of coercion coming from Lobnitz, where they capture the community through threatenings. So they get into the threat is that I let you live to the community. I let you live in exchange for you not to bother me. That's the way it works. There is like a policy of blocks, well-organized blocks. They prevent They prevent like local agreements in order to perpetuate this kind of system. And because they need to wash their hands or like keep their reputation or their social reputation, they need some strategies. And so this is the way it works, and they only contribute to violence when it is needed for them. So this is the kind of domination logic or domination strategy of the global corporations in order to control the territories, the resources, the raw materials, and to keep their areas secure for them, and to exclude the local population for a long time, keeping them excluded, of course. This is the way we've seen in Mexico, and I'm sure that must be the way it works in many countries. So we are talking about a kind of system that works on a global way, but not really in the local community. So of course the owners don't live in the local communities. Of course they don't even live in Mexico, for example, and they mainly live in the central points of the world system. You know? Maybe in the UK, or maybe in their private island in the Caribbean, or who knows. But they are only worried about keeping their source of minerals and materials for the industrial market, and that's the base of the system. So in this coercion horizon, the way the anthropologist Lovnis has developed it. Now I am using it in the way it relates in the mining markets. So they simulate legality. They pretend to have a reciprocity that is balanced, and that the laws that they respect liberal law, or the right to compete, the right to human rights, of course. They pretend to allow people, the local people, to live freely and to have the benefits of the local land. And this works for example, through threats to the local communities to sell their land, and they say that they respect the political rights and the civil rights of the population in general. So they are just saying that they are good. They are good and socially aware, and they pretend that all the profit goes also to the communities. And so from in the case of the balanced reciprocity, in the lower part of this chart, there is a policy of capture, like a philanthropic intervention as well, in order to control as a form of social contract, and also an administration of violence. So there are many cases in Mexico. There are many cases of workers that has been murdered. When there are some protests, demonstrations in the communities, because they have already been robbed of their water resources, or they have big wells or big infrastructures, large infrastructures. They just steal all the water from maybe 100 kilometers away in order to bring the water to the mine site, and they steal the water for all the community, 100 kilometers around, I have already researched this, and I have proofs of that. And it's not just me. There are many cases like this in Mexico, and I imagine, I guess this also happens in South Africa. So it will be interesting to see, to compare if it works in a similar way, through a similar logic. But of course, there is a lot of violence in this context, and this kind of what I call negative reciprocity. So in the human relations, it's just like a balanced reciprocity. I will call that a positive reciprocity, or negative reciprocity, where just one part gets all the benefit. So in this case, it's negative reciprocity, and that's the way they work. But they pretend to be socially aware, and giving some gifts to people, to children, for example, and they pretend to be doing good for local communities. They pretend to be conscious about environmental issues, but in reality, their contract relationships has to do with the cohesion, no? And so if a community don't want to give them their water resources, then they will use their strategies, for example, their relations with the organized crime, in order to scare the local farmers or the small farmers, so that they don't say anything. That's so under the carpet. They simply breach human rights frequently.
3 minutes, doctor, just 3 minutes.
This has been happening for a long time. I'm going to finish soon. So there is this kind of speech or narratives of sustainable mining. So they have a strategies to build networks, to establish relationships with national states, with other powers, so that they obtain benefits from there to their businesses. They have also an academic area, no, in different universities, Harvard, Simon Fraser University, other kind of academic areas, in some cases excellent universities, and they also have like very intelligent people doing strategies. The Council for I'm not sure. I have researched some of these initiatives before. I'm not completely sure how are they working right now, but there is a logic of the researchers to develop this kind of way of. So they research which are the communities that are easier to control, and they work in a very clever way. They have people everywhere, and they have like a chain of strategies, trying to obtain the confidence of people, of local people, and then have the legitimacy for their projects, so that the local people become invested in the projects, and sometimes the local people even think that the mining companies are working for the benefit of the community. There is one researcher here that he has been in Mexico, and he has been disseminating these ideas. They also have some tools for community development, and how to identify the way people are, what are their interests, so how to assess, and they look for mechanisms of claims or complaints. They bring people to talk about sustainability, social development, and they start building little factories, little economic activities in order to control society. And in many cases, this is local farmers, and in some cases there are problems between the families, the local families, because of some of them have received support and some others no. They also have plans or strategies of monitoring and assessment, and they follow the lives of all the people, and they have this kind of research, and they control society through those kind of research. So they have a full library of this kind of rubbish, academic rubbish, but it's also very clever. If you learn to do this, you will probably become rich. So this is for the people who wants to just get rich easily. If they learn this kind of tool, it will work. So these are strategies that work very well for them in order to control the population. And of course, they are environmentalists. They are very aware of the environment. How does this work in Mexico, for example? In a mine site. The Colcorp, a Colcorp mine site, they invested 25. Sorry. This is the distribution of the money that was used for the mines in Mexico, and the money that was left in different places. So in this case, companies in Mexico, in a 19-year period, they invested $25 million, and they had a profit of $172,000 million, and they reinvest to get to this. So their capital, their equity, went from 25 to 172 million. On the other hand, this income has increased in 17 years, 678%. The increase of the income was 678%. That's it, almost 7 times more in a period, or 38.8 annually. If, for example, interest rates are 3%, and this is completely, when you try to invest your money, the interest rates are in other league. So they are earning 172 million, 38% profit annually, increase annually. From the 47,000 workers, they only receive 7,800 million. That is, we will need to do like to divide it, but it is the problem is very clear of how this is not going to the workers. And in the case of like in measures for environmental remediation, it's just 0.48%. And in the case of community support program, that is just 0.5%, 886 million. So So this is the way, the capitalist way in which they are just exploiting, these corporations are exploiting, and some arguments will say that that some people need to sacrifice because the modern world needs minerals. But why do we need this kind of system to get these minerals? That's the question. So what is efficiency in this kind of argument?
1 minute, please, Dr. Orozco, if you can just wrap up.
And so this is all the chart of how it is working, like all the stakeholders, all the different agents working in it. So the people or the organizations in the middle working, supporting. It has, in Mexico, this has changed a lot. But on top there is the miners, or not the miners, the mining companies. So this is a whole system. There are thinking agencies here, thinking organizations with thinking persons that are using an ideology to control as a system of control. Sorry for taking a bit longer.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Orozco. And I think it's quite clear that mining corporations are definitely have become more sophisticated, but also stronger, and even more resourced. But I think a good question mark, again, that your presentation brings is what proportion of the profits are shared and distributed with communities, but also with workers. And I think this really becomes quite important, not only in the Mexican case, but also in the South African, and also as global trends we monitor. So to present the South African case, let me ask Mrs. Elise Tempelhoff and Professor Johan Tempelhoff as co-authors of the chapter, who will just present the South African case and some of the key conclusions from that.
Right. Thank you very much for allowing us and enabling us to do a presentation to you. I'm actually an assistant of my wife, who is a very active journalist, and I'm a water historian, but somewhere along the way, we always tend to be able to integrate and combine our passions for the fields in which we are working. So in this presentation, we will be looking at the energy, state, and civil society, but at the heart of it is the mining energy cluster in South Africa and Southern Africa that has taken on a distinct shape. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can still see your screen.
Right. Now, we will be talking about the title, the energy state and civil society, and our introduction deals with energy and the state and the responsibilities of the state in providing energy and to what extent there are lapses. I will give a background before my wife starts dealing with the rush for oil and gas in South Africa's oceans, Operation Pakisa, offshore prospecting sites, more companies involved, and the survey and drilling eco implications of the system. I may also just mention to you, we are talking about the energy-water nexus that features prominently within this context. Right, now, I will give a basic background to the book project. We studied mining in South Africa since the 19th century, and then I extracted the essential details of energy and fossil fuels. And our focus is on mining. And at first, it was also in the field of gas mining, methane, and we foregrounded issues of increasing offshore energy searches as South Africa's mining sector is beginning to decline. Right now, coal emerged at the heart of the United Kingdom's Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. In South Africa, of course, as a colonial area of the British Empire, we find that at many locations in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, pretty close to the coast, but also in the inland, there were discoveries of coal mining deposits. And this did not really come too much with, only in the 1870s things started up. And increasingly, it was the fossil fuel was vital to mining, especially in the diamond mining fields of Kimberley and also in Mpumalanga, where coal was discovered. And subsequently, of course, coal had to provide support to the Witwatersrand gold mines that produced the most gold since the 19th century in the world. So early 20th century urban gas consumption was limited. It was mined, but it did not appeal much to consumers because it was dangerous and it was rather clumsy to deal with. But the footprint of coal mining extensively increased because since 1923, coal-fired power stations were developed in several parts of South Africa, and at the helm was the state parastatal of Eskom, the Electricity Supply Commission, that was consolidated into an entity in the first half of the 20th century. By the 1950s, synthetic fuels from coal were produced at Sasol in the Vaal River region, Vaal Triangle, and also in Mpumalanga by the 1970s. The heartlands of coal currently persist in Mpumalanga and Limpopo provinces further to the north and further to the east. And limited hydropower developments took place over the years because of the assumed abundance of coal in South Africa. In 1972, South Africa acquired its first nuclear power station situated in Cape Town, and it made a contribution to the system. So the countrywide network of electricity supply by the 1970s and 1980s saw the development of the water infrastructure developments, the integrated Vaal River system, and also the Orange River systems. And this contributed to what became a water energy nexus that was used in the apartheid era's isolation to strengthen the influence of the state and the economic power of the state to maintain industries within the country, and also unlawfully engaging with international trade. But then in the period in 1990 to 1994, the apartheid South Africa was democratized, and the transition to a new South Africa brought in the dawn of a new nation that had no racial barriers, and it was a liberal democracy. And what was important is that previously disadvantaged communities now had access to municipal water, sanitation, energy in both the urban and rural areas of the country. Now, the water energy nexus had experienced some of its first lapses because of increased consumption already before 2000, and there were warnings to the government that they have to take measures to prevent collapses of the system. Now, in the field of energy, the first load shedding started in late 2007 up to mid-2008, but it was intermittent and it was not of long duration at times. So, but this trend of load shedding intensified since 2017 with increasing collapse of overworked and sometimes outdated power stations, as well as diminishing on-land coal resources. Now, in the 2000s, civil society and energy experts critiqued the mining energy complex as a very well-organized unit within the mining sector in South Africa, and it was a space that a civil society became active in because of literally all the types of exploitation that our Mexican colleague earlier mentioned. Also, as soil mined coal declined, there was a shift to offshore South Africa to start prospecting the oceanic waters of the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean at Southern Africa's tip in search of gas and also oil. Now Elise will take over.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes,
You
we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, because all I see is my screen. Thank you for having me. This was a very difficult experiment for me to be involved in this project. Therefore, I just called in my husband to help because he's an academic and I'm a journalist. I just want to add to what he said that in 2007, let me go back to 2002. In 2002, the Mineral Resources and Development Act came into being, and that meant that all the minerals in South Africa belongs to the state. Actually, the state was supposed to be the custodian for the minerals, but as time went by, they sort of had this notion that the minerals belong to them and they can give it out to whoever they wish. In 2007, there was a rush for coal, especially in Mpumalanga, which was regarded as South Africa's breadbasket. It is also the province where all our big rivers start, the basins of all our biggest rivers start. And as I said, in 2007, everyone with a spade or a back actor could come in and just started mining. So, and it was for coal. And the coal was very close to the surface, so it was very easy to get it out. And big companies, like Claudio said, they came in and they just ripped this province apart. And later on, when it became too hot for them, they started backtracking and selling what was left of their assets to black empowerment companies like Exaro, and BHP Billiton also got very critiques, and so they withdrew and they changed their name to South 32. And then there's also the president's brother-in-law, Patrice Motsepe, who is one of the biggest and most, or the richest coal miners in the catchment of the Olifants River. Then there's also Exaro, which is the first black-owned company in South Africa. Now, I wrote extensively about Exaro. Exaro is also one of the funders of the ANC. So Mpumalanga is more or less, you can absolutely more or less cut off Mpumalanga from South Africa's map. And we are also going to lose the Kruger National Park, because one of the biggest rivers, the Olifants River, that goes through Kruger into Mozambique, into Masanjir Dam, into the Indian Ocean, is full of toxic coal dust and heavy metals. Now, if I come to the rush for oil and gas, like Susan Comrie, she's a colleague of mine, there was a report, a very extensive report that was published in November last year. And I just quote from that report. So the report's name is "Who Has the Power?" And Susan said, driven by a desire to exploit the final boom of the fossil fuel industry. A campaign of gas is being waged based not on what our electricity system needs, but on what a handful of politicians and oil and gas executives want. South Africa was one of the signatories of the 2015 global climate change, the Paris Agreement, which means that we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. And now, as Susan said, the last few seams of coal is being mined out in Mpumalanga, and especially in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, because that's where all the coal deposits are. But it's most of it, 60% of the coal is being exported to the east, mostly to China and India. And we haven't spoken about the Ukraine and Russia conflict, but that has also got a big influence on mining in South Africa. Now, the last pieces of coal is being mined out, and now the government, which is very much intertwined with big industry, is focusing on our oceans. Our oceans are the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. And South Africa regards gas as a transition fuel. So in 2014, without any public participation, without any warning, the then President Zuma announced Operation Pakisa, which means in Sesotho, hurry up. It is now the name changed. We don't use the wording Operation Pakisa anymore. I don't know, it just disappeared because it got a bad name. Said he wanted to unlock the Indian and Atlantic Ocean's economy. But there's a huge pushback from civil society. There's a series of court cases against Shell, where Shell wanted to start seismic tests on the Wild Coast, and the court, they had a verdict in favor of the civil society. Fortunately, we have a very, very strong civil society in South Africa, and they all started collaborating, because this whole issue of the ocean's economy is a huge threat to South Africa's development and to South Africa's prosperity. Now, the Shell case is a case that's made international waves, and Shell has now withdrawn because public participation was not well done, and there are no studies done. In 2021, residents of the South African West Coast chased away seismic, but now in the meantime, seismic came back, and they are at this very moment doing seismic tests from the Namibian coast to the Orange Basin between St. Helena Bay and Honderklip Bay. So they, Searchers Seismic they were chased away, but they came back in 2022, and they ticked all the boxes, and within 10 months, the DMRE's Minister Gwede Mantashe gave them the go-ahead. Now, how it works in South Africa is the appeal authority is the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, DFFE. Then you can appeal to her. And 21 NGOs appealed to Mrs. Creasy, and the appeal was just brushed off the desk, off her desk. So it is very significant that the Minister of Environment, who is tasked with protecting the environment, just brushed off all these appeals. And these appeals were all based upon the concerns of the fisher folk, of conservation NGOs, and ordinary people, who said that this seismic surveys can't happen because South Africa is a biodiverse. Our oceans are extremely biodiverse. Now I'll show you the map. It's the map of South Africa, and if you look at all the blocks, it is the blocks that are now in the which are now being targeted by. Well, it is very in this area, this green area is the economic zone, South Africa's economic zone around it's about 200 kilometers wide, and we call it a special economic zone. And you can see how old President Zuma, but the former President Zuma, how he divided it into blocks. So the only block at the moment, which is where Searchers Seismic is now, also they changed their name to Searcher Geodata. They are doing seismic searches, yes, in that area. And then all the other blocks are, can you just go on? Okay, there are more companies becoming involved, and within all these companies, Petra SA is a stakeholder. There is Eco Atlantic. They are trying to prospect for oil and gas from Cape Town up to the Namibian border. Eco Atlantic Oil and Gas, Total Energies, Sasol, and Exxon are all targeting the area between Cape Town and the Namibian border. And Cape Town, and then there's also Total Energies, Shell and Petra SA, and Tusaku Energy, a BEE in joint venture with Total Energy, want to drill holes in the ocean floor from Cape Town to Cape Agulhas. And it is very important to just mention that between Cape Town and Cape Agulhas is Hermanus, where there is a breeding, it's a breeding colony, not only one colony, it's a breeding area for the southern right whale and for turtles and okay, and then there's also CGG Oil and Gas Surveying Services with Total Energies and Petra SA between Gilberta, Cape St. Francis, Tsitsikamma, Plettenberg Bay, and Knysna. Between Mossel Bay and Cape St. Francis, it's called the Outeniqua Basin. Total Energies are busy expanding. They have the Brilpada and the Leipert blocks, which they already explored. But they had a little bit of a problem because, not a little bit of a problem, because the Agulhas stream is extremely strong, and they don't talk about it very often, but apparently they had some, not a collision, a disaster with their infrastructure. Then in this area is also Qatar Energy and the Canadian Natural Resources are all international, are searching for oil and gas in this area. Now, the implications of the surveying and the drilling there are numerous marine protected areas around this South African coast. And the South African coast is more or less 3,600 kilometers in length. The town of Hermanus, as I said, is in the center of the prospecting strip. Hermanus offshore, where southern right whales annually breed. There are sea turtles, and they will be deafened by mechanical noise. Then there's also proof that fish migrations will become disruptive. Now, around South Africa, there are 35 whale species that will be impacted, 11 dolphin species, 8 fish species, 13 shark species, and then the South African brown fur seals, 60 endangered bird species. And then there's also the sardine run, and which will be disrupted, which people along the Indian Ocean, along this Wild Coast and KZN coast, every year they get their sardines to use as food and to catch other fish. The critically endangered African penguin, these are all warning signals. And then there are several court cases going on, but NGOs, I'm working very closely with the NGOs. They are absolutely, they don't actually want the big industry to realize that, but they are absolutely overwhelmed because big industry comes in, they do the public participation, but they can't, the NGOs can't get to everything. So the NGOs that are very active at the moment, very active and overworked, are the Green Connection, Oceans Not Oil, Natural Justice, Groundwork, South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, the Center for Environmental Rights, and even the SPCA jumped into this. You can actually call it a war, because it is a kind of a battle to get these big industries away from our oceans. Now, oil and
3 minutes, colleagues.
Thank you. Oil and gas is seen as a transitional energy source, but it's not the case. It leads to climate change. I follow the climate conferences very closely, and there is a huge pushback from civil society against gas, and they want us to change to, not just us, the whole world, to change to renewables, because we can't go on like this. We had this huge climate tragedy in KZN in 2021. We have droughts, we have wildfires, and gas can't be seen as a transition fuel, because you get leaks and you get methane flaring, and that is all. And methane is more powerful than just CO2. It's 87 times more powerful than CO2. Okay, now our conclusion is that there is evidence of potential ecocide in South Africa's oceans. It's a major threat, the mining energy complex. We have these load shedding, and we also have this, what is it, the notion that the load shedding is explicit to make people vulnerable to power cuts, so that they will say that they will support this ocean drilling. And but the problem is that the political landscape and the energy landscape is very much intertwined in South Africa. So it's very difficult to break this chain of power in the energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you for that, colleagues. I think it really shows the complexities of mining, especially in contemporary times. There's still profits to be made by global corporations. However, there's also a number of considerations: the impact on communities, on the environment, what proportion actually goes towards workers, what are the conditions of workers, but also massive debates around future technologies, around the energy transition. And it really highlights, I think, the complexities that the sector is dealing with, both in the South African case, in the Mexican case, but also globally. And I think the two presentations on the South African case, but also on the Mexican case, really highlight the complexities of this sector in contemporary times, and also highlight why the research that went into the book remains as relevant today as it was when the book actually came out. So colleagues, with that, and also mindful of time, what I would like to do is just to have a look at already the questions that have come from the chat. And I'd like to just maybe take the next 10 minutes just to look at that before we close the session. I would also invite, as I'm reading this question, I would also invite anyone who has a question or comment to also just raise their hand, and I will note them. But the question that has already been posed is as follows. Are there any lessons that Mexico can share with South Africa on how to deal with artisanal, illegal mining? Mining in South Africa has a terrible historical legacy defined by exploitation, cheap labor supply, migrant labor system, neglect of the welfare of mine workers, which recently led to class action being instituted on behalf of hundreds of ailing former employees of the mining industry by human rights lawyers. What has been the experience of Mexico in this regard? And lastly, mining continues to be among the main sources of conflict and destabilization in some parts of the African continent. Care to expand on this scourge? So I'd ask Dr. Orozco to go into the elements of lessons from Mexico to South Africa, especially in illegal mining. And then I will ask our colleagues, Mrs. Elise Tempelhoff and Professor Johann Tempelhoff, to go into some of these conflicts where mining has been a source of conflict and destabilization in parts of Africa, and how we could actually overcome that. And following that, then I think we can ask Susanna to come in and to wrap up for us. So with you first, Dr. Orozco.
Sí, gracias. Mire, no hay minería gambusina ya en México.
There is no
Desapareció hace años. Y entonces no hay, digamos, esta situación tan desesperada.
We don't have this desperate situation of people looking for minerals because it is controlled. And because there is another logic, such as the fact that peasants, they own their lands, communities that own their own lands in a different way, not such as ejidos and communities, such as a collective way of doing agriculture, but in most of them, yes. So I cannot give much, but what I can say is it is sad that this type of mining, Gambusina mining, is a resource. It's an extreme resource for people to look for profits and for money. So it is a problem of misery, diseases that we need to look at. But the fact that it is there, that it exists in front, compared with the other mining, this is not the problem. This is not the issue of our country, of people with diseases. They are there because they don't have, because their families probably sold their land, or they lost it, or there is violence and colonialism. All this heavy history destroys this network, and people have to eat. So instead of this type of mining, so let's look at this other type of mining with 0.5%. They could live, these people could live without dying and getting poisoned. This is the main issue of mining. So mining in the search for metals and oil, they promote the development of technology. Without of this, the system doesn't work. So we have to think globally. we tend to forget, but we have to think about decreasing. And when we think about decreasing worldwide, we think that we are decreasing the population, and that's not correct. That's not right. It's to decrease the system of accumulation and to change the logics of production. We have to dismantle the system, and it cannot continue with a monopoly logic.
Es muy cómodo, ¿verdad? Nada más jugamos con papelitos y se inventa el dinero, se sacan más papelitos.
So we just create money without value in front of what really has value.
Entonces, estamos en un momento difícil.
So this is we're facing a difficult time. Miners and non-miners, we're in a difficult moment, facing a difficult moment. And this will not be solved just evading the problem. So unfortunately, this is a result. We have to relocate people, those who are sick, take them to a place where they have a decent life, because they have been affected. But this is the issue. It always makes me angry. This topic always makes me angry.
Me too.
So there's a problem that we should not be playing to sustainable development, just pretending to look for that. We have a problem with civilization, and there is a war, a conflict, and now populations kill each other and no one protests, except for South Africa, where they do. So this is a problem in our civilization. It's not a problem about finding solutions. So it's a problem with our civilizations. Sorry, I just talked too much.
No, excellent. I think that was very, I think it really warranted that. And I think it's really fundamental questions that it really brings to mind. I think the logic of extraction, but also the type of economic systems that we have. And I think with that, let me ask the Tempelhofs to give us their last, sort of reflections and this idea of at times mining as a source of conflict in parts of the continent, I guess even globally.
Yes, I just wanted to add that, it's such a complex issue, the whole mining issue. I mean, we haven't even mentioned 30% in our case studies, not even 30% of what is really happening in South Africa. On the Wild Coast, there was a murder. And in KwaZulu-Natal, there was also a murder. But nobody in the police could ever resolve these murders. But civil society is definitely very strong in South Africa. Now, if you mention the class actions, now the class actions are not about the illegal mining. That's something totally different. It is mine workers that used to work in the mines that contracted silicosis and all kinds of diseases. Now that is, we have very strong human rights legal people like Richard Spoor, who is now tackling the big mining companies to pay compensation. And he is not only fighting in South Africa, he has he works in collaboration with a British legal company. So they're taking on all the gold mining companies, and now he has just started with the coal mining companies. So the illegal mines are, many of these big mines are also illegal because they start without water use licenses. They just start, like Glencore and Exxaro and all those people. They just start without a water use license. So not to mention them as illegal. It's just as illegal as these people who used to work for the mines, but are now going back into the corridors of the old mines because they know how the mines were, and they are people without jobs. So they go into the old mines and looking for the scraps that is still left.
On the theme of artisanal mining, we must bear in mind that it's not just a South African problem. It is something that extends beyond the boundaries of South Africa in neighboring countries. For example, for the greater part of the apartheid era and the post-apartheid era, more than 80% of Lesotho's revenue came from its migrant miners working in South Africa. And as the mines start reducing their workers, we find that the migrant laborers are usually the first to suffer. And if they return to, for example, Lesotho, they return to hardly anything and they have no stable income. And at present, at the University of Cape Town and also within certain mining circles where there is a sense of responsibility, there are investigations now of promoting alternative investments in neighboring countries in order to address the issue of unemployed miners. And for South Africa's safety and security, we find, especially in the informal settlements, that the artisanal miners have caused major problems to local communities that have been peaceful for many years, and they are now under threat, and they feel threatened not only on the Witwatersrand Gauteng goldfields, but also on the former Free State goldfields. So we are dealing with this issue, but there are measures that are being taken, but I'm afraid it is not sufficient to deal with a long and enduring crisis that we are bound to experience.
Can I just add one thing that I think is very important? We, every time a mine comes in, they usually have a provision for rehabilitation, which is never enough, because you can't really rehabilitate a piece of land that's been mined out. But we have at the moment more than 6,000 derelict mines. You can't find the owners, they're gone. 6,000, never, it's holes in the ground, heaps, mine dumps, and the owners are gone, and the water is contaminated.
Colleagues, I think this has really been quite an informative discussion. And I think, just quoting a colleague who just wrote in the chat, and he just wants to thank the authors for this informative discussion, and of course the editors. And with that, colleagues, I'm sure we will be able to even distribute those presentations and the slides to the participants after this webinar. So with that, if I can ask Ms. Susanna Caputi to close the discussion for us. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Runtembo. Thank you to all the speakers. It has certainly been a very informative webinar.
I think there's an issue with the audio, Susanna. I can't hear you. Or is it just me?
Maybe it's you, because my microphone is not, it is open. Yes, let
Just
me
indicate,
continue.
colleagues, if you can hear her. I can't hear her on my side.
Can you hear me?
Yo te oigo bien, claro que sí.
Yeah,
Yo te oigo bien.
Okay.
Maybe you can just come out of interpretation. Maybe that would help. Yes, it has certainly been a very informative webinar, and the information shared by our main speakers proves again valuable, and the updates since the book was written even more useful. The unequivocal and strong power of our civil society in South Africa is commendable and shows to be time and time again important when it comes to defending the rights of communities and the environment in issues related to the mining industry. Let us give credit to the civil society in South Africa. The way forward, the Institute for Global Dialogue, in partnership with the Embassy of Mexico, are supporting the series of 4 webinars programmed for 2024, and today's webinar is one of that series. In relation to other chapters of the book, Global South Powers in Transition, a comparative analysis of Mexico and South Africa. I thank you all for joining us today. I declare this webinar closed. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
There is something in the chat.
Yeah, a huge one. Says we are, it's one-sided. And we haven't had the input of the mining industry. I understand the negative view that the participants have of the sector. However, mining is not only done to disadvantage people and pollute the environment, but that is what we experience.
No, excellent. Thank you, colleagues. I think this definitely brings rise to more discussion, and I think this is exactly what this discussion wanted to do. So I'm glad that it brought rise to more interest, and certainly going forward, we'll definitely be hearing more voices. So thanks, colleagues.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hasta luego.
Gracias a todos. Adiós.